I don't know about you, but I really don't want to end up someday dying alone in a heat wave like so many elderly people in Europe so far this summer. On our rapidly warming planet, these major heat waves are quickly becoming the new norm instead of a rare anomaly. One thing that particularly saddens me about the over 1,000 excess deaths that occurred in France and other countries in June is how many of them involved elderly people, particularly older people living alone without a strong network of connections to check in on them. We're told the responsible thing to do to prepare for retirement is to spend the best years of our lives hyper focused on earning and saving money in retirement accounts. That's led us to lose sight of the real supports we need to put in place that are also vital, possibly even more vital to ensure we thrive and stay alive in the midst of rapid climate change, late stage capitalism, and increasing authoritarianism. Not to mention that cultivating these other forms of wealth, like health, community, skills, knowledge, and resilience, makes life a lot more meaningful and enjoyable along the way. We all need community and connections to some extent to help us age. Even if you have some retirement savings, it doesn't inoculate you from needing people to check in on you when you're older if you live alone during a heat wave to see if you're okay and remind you to drink more water, since as you age, you're less likely to sense your thirst. And if you've sacrificed your foundation of good health in your pursuit of saving all that money over the years for your retirement, well, there's much less your money can do to help your body deal with the extreme heat and your weak heart. Since I'm a green living and money coach, I think a lot about how climate disasters will impact our lives as we age. However, it's worth expanding this conversation to link it to this recent article in The Atlantic that points out how Americans are in denial about what their elder care will look like. Judging from the large number of isolated elderly Europeans that have died alone in this recent heat wave so far, I don't think it's just Americans who are out of touch with the realities of aging in our current reality. Many adults end up relying on their children for this kind of support. But even if you have kids, there's no guarantee they'll be of assistance as you age. Some will live too far, or be too busy, or you may be estranged from them. Even better government support systems aren't enough to eliminate your need for help from other people. As the Atlantic article points out, even in other countries like the Netherlands, where the government offers residents generous long-term care insurance, nearly half of elderly Dutch residents who need assistance with their ADLs, those activities of daily living such as bathing, grocery shopping, paying bills, remembering to drink more water in a heat wave, still partly or even entirely rely on informal care from family and friends. The reality is that your elder care will not be outsourced, at least not entirely, even if you live in the United States and have money. That's because even when the elderly are in residential care facilities, family members, be they birthed or chosen, still tend to be highly involved. Someone has to coordinate the payments to the assisted living facility, keep up with the loved one's online banking, submit the claims to their long-term care insurance company, or buy the new shoes when the old ones wear out. None of which a dementia patient, for example, can do for themselves. In this excellent Substack post by Jody Day, she describes how her mother-in-law, with whom she lived until she passed away at 94, was an independent, well-traveled, and intelligent woman. Even then, Day and her husband ended up quietly taking over many of the tasks that their mother or mother-in-law could no longer manage herself. Most of these, as Day writes, were not what comes to mind when you think of the word care. The older woman could do her own laundry, but it was Day and her husband who purchased the detergents and fixed the washing machine. She had an iPad and was very active on Facebook, but it was her son who installed and maintained the Wi-Fi connection, purchased the iPad, kept up to date with the software updates, and helped her sort things out when she got scammed. Day goes on to write that when she first knew her mother-in-law, she still prepared meals regularly, but over time, standing or even sitting to cook became too challenging for her. So Day gradually took over all the meals as her mother-in-law slowly stopped doing even little bits of cooking. Then her mother-in-law stopped doing even little bits of shopping too, so Day and her husband took complete responsibility for the whole thing. Her mother-in-law, she says, was a brilliant driver, but gradually it dropped to just her weekly visit to the hairdresser, as her mobility meant she was anxious about parking near enough for things. However, it was her son who purchased, maintained, and insured the car, including filling it up with gas. Because my life and work are shaped by permaculture, a sustainable design toolkit based on the ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share, I think a lot about what permaculture retirement planning might involve. In our younger years, so many of us drawn to permaculture and other regenerative practices end up ambitiously establishing abundant food forests in our yards filled with fruit trees, installing barrels and cisterns for rainwater catchment, setting up extensive compost systems and other infrastructure that takes physical strength and agility to maintain and repair. And a lot of people pursue their permaculture dreams by moving onto large chunks of land in rural areas where their isolation increases and their access to reliable healthcare and other supports decreases. Who's going to take on those background tasks when you get older that keep your food forest healthy and well maintained and productive? Who's going to fix the crack in the pipe running from the roof to the cistern when it breaks? Who's going to turn or distribute the compost when you're no longer able to lift the shovel? Who's going to get you to your doctor's appointments when you're no longer able to drive? Not having kids myself, I'm especially concerned about putting the right supports in place to help me age with grace and dignity. Even those who are able to age at home, they'll likely end up needing assistance with these background tasks. Since the number of childless adult Americans is somewhere between 15 to 20% and likely to increase in the future, I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling a bit anxious about this. My first line of defense is trying to maintain good health and a healthy lifestyle throughout my life to reduce my fragility and need for assistance in my later years. That means things like eating a lot of fresh, healthy foods that I forage, grow, am gifted, and rescue from the waste stream, riding my bike more often than I drive my car, exercising, as well as playing games like Scrabble and dominoes to maintain cognitive function. It sure as heck also includes building community and developing strong relationships with people of all ages. I mentioned in this video how some of our dear friends, along with their mother/mother-in-law, and 2 children moved into the house next door to my boyfriend's. They've now conjoined their sustainable living and gardening efforts, sharing chickens, honey, garden produce, chores, tools, and more. Since our friend and her mom are both nurses, there were conversations early on about how they can eventually play a role in helping Albert age in place. And me too, even though I live a mile away. This all happened very intentionally. When that property next door to Albert came up for sale last year, he thought long and hard about who he knew that might be a good fit, meaning that the house would suit their needs and that they'd share his vision of a sustainable future together. This option isn't going to work for everyone, but most of you can pursue the alter-kin circles that Jody Day discussed in that Substack article I mentioned earlier. Day is also childless, which has led to her experiment with assembling what she calls alter-kin, short for alternative kin circles. She acknowledges that it's not a new concept. Marginalized communities have always done this. For example, queer folks have been creating chosen families forever. Day says of her own circle that there are currently 8 people, all aging without children for various reasons, a mixture of partnered and unpartnered, and mostly women. All of them are within walking distance or a maximum 20-minute drive away from each other. They meet monthly, rotating through each other's homes, and have a WhatsApp group. That's it, she says. They're aiming to keep it as low-tech as possible, which makes a lot of sense since technology can become so challenging as you age. Since this is somewhat new, she doesn't have a roadmap to share yet. Plus, she and the other members of her circle live in rural Ireland. Their needs and reality will likely differ from yours. I love the point Day makes about how whenever she mentions the Alterkin project, other non-parents get very excited and say that that is what they want too, and ask how do they get it. It's almost as if it's a product they'd like to buy, she notes, because that's the capitalist paradigm we've been conditioned in. When she tells them community is built by doing inconvenient things with inconvenient people at inconvenient times, that usually slows things down a notch. That same capitalist paradigm has also created our transactional, isolated, bootstrapper society that is so detrimental to what we really need to age well. That's why I appreciate that both Jody Day's Substack article and the piece in The Atlantic touch on another overlooked skill we need to be developing to thrive in retirement: getting much more comfortable asking for help and offering it to those around us, regardless of whether we're bound by blood or law. This is true for all of us, but this observation about seniors without children caught my attention. Childless seniors, according to many experts, on average need more healthcare services than other seniors with adult children. Although the reasons aren't clearly understood, it's assumed that less family assistance means changes in a person's health may go unnoticed. Overall, they may be more isolated and less likely to ask for help. So it seems the more easily and readily you can reach out to someone to ask for help, the more likely you are to experience better health outcomes, longevity, and improved quality of life as you age. Plus, for most of us, being part of a vibrant community is preferable at any age to being lonely, isolated, and fragile. If you'd like to come together in community with me and others concerned about aging in uncertain times, I invite you to join me for Retirement Beyond the 401k, a pay what you want live online workshop I'll be hosting Wednesday, July 15th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I've put the link in the description below. We'll collectively explore alternative ways of preparing for our golden years in the midst of such interesting times and start getting more comfortable discussing our concerns and needs. You don't have to age alone, but you do have to put some effort into ensuring that you don't.